What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be comparing a 14-year-old DSLR to one of the most advanced APS-C cameras on the market today. This is the Canon Rebel T3 versus the Sony a6700, with a little bit of a twist. We aren't going to be looking at specs, autofocus, or video capabilities. Instead, we're going to be taking a deep dive into raw image quality and how modern post-processing might help you close the gap between these two cameras more than you think. This is my friend's Canon Rebel T3, which released in 2011. My friend bought hers around 2014, and it still works just fine. We took it out for a photo walk in a local park a few weeks ago to see how it stacks up against my Sony a6700, paired with the Viltrox 27mm f1.2 Pro lens. Again, let me be clear that this video is not about which camera is easier to use, faster to focus, or more fun to shoot. I have not spent enough time using the Canon to make that judgment fairly, and I suspect that the answer would be the Sony a6700 by a country mile. What we are evaluating is this: what kind of image quality can you get from each of these cameras if you shoot in RAW and apply modern AI-based post-processing tools? The Canon T3 was paired with its original 18-55mm kit lens, while the Sony had the Viltrox 27mm f1.2. Obviously, the Sony has a huge lens advantage here. The Viltrox 27mm f1.2 is significantly sharper and faster, but every image you see was shot in RAW and processed using DxO Pure RAW 4.0, software that applies lens corrections, noise reduction, and optical improvements using AI-based deep learning. When I first saw the images from the Canon T3 after running them through DxO Pure RAW, I was honestly pretty surprised by how well they stacked up. Just to put things in perspective, the T3 has a 12-megapixel sensor from 2011, while the a6700 has a 26-megapixel sensor released in 2023. The images from the Canon were way sharper than I expected. Obviously, it doesn't match the resolving power on the Sony, especially when you zoom in, but it didn't fall apart either. If you're just posting to social media, particularly Instagram, where you expect your viewers to be looking at your photos on a mobile device, the Canon T3 is more than adequate. Just be aware that this is only a 12-megapixel sensor, so your ability to punch in is going to be a lot more limited than with the a6700's 26-megapixel sensor. However, in scenes with lots of detail and contrast, like tree branches and wildlife, you will see a lot more chromatic aberration from the Canon's kit lens. In shots like this one, there's just a ton of magenta fringing around the tree branches against the sky. But considering that this lens is basically free with the camera on eBay, I think that what is more or less edge-to-edge clarity after post-processing is pretty impressive. Another area where the gap between these two sensors is evident is in dynamic range. The Sony a6700 gives you a lot more room to push shadows and recover highlights without introducing color shifts or noise. With the Canon, there isn't a whole lot of flexibility to save areas of your image that are over or underexposed, so you need to be a lot more careful when you're shooting. I was able to get uniformly usable images, but I was basically cranking the highlight slider in Lightroom down to -100 on basically every shot with the sky in frame. While this allowed me to get some depth and dimension to the clouds, it did exacerbate the issues this kit lens has with chromatic aberration, which is a trade-off you may be less willing to make than I was. While this wasn't an issue in the middle of an overcast day, when it comes to low-light performance, the differences between these two cameras is pretty stark. The Canon T3 maxes out at ISO 6400, and the images start getting pretty noisy well before that. Meanwhile, the Sony a6700 can handle 6-digit ISO levels with AI-based denoising, which gives you much more flexibility in challenging lighting conditions. Indoor events, concerts, night photography, situations where the Canon would really struggle without adding artificial light. What is interesting is how modern denoising tools like DxO Pure RAW can help bridge this gap somewhat. While they can't restore detail that was never captured, they do make the Canon's ISO 1600 and 3200 files a lot more usable than they would have been with the software available when this camera was released back in 2011. 3200 ISO was a lot scarier back then than it is today in 2025. With that said, if you're frequently shooting in low light, this is probably the area where you'll feel the most technological advancement when comparing these two cameras. DxO Pure RAW really made an enormous difference in leveling the playing field between these two cameras. It reduced noise, fixed lens distortions, and made everything look just a little bit more modern. Thinking about how much of a difference this software can make for RAW files coming from an older camera gives me a lot of regret, actually, because I owned a Sony Nex 3N for nearly 10 years, and I didn't hold on to many of the RAW files that I shot during that period. Looking back, I really wish I had. With tools like this available today, I could go back through some of my old shots and make them look like they were taken with the modern camera. And that's the real takeaway here. If you're just getting into photography, don't worry if you're starting with an old camera. The Canon Rebel T3 and similar entry-level DSLRs are selling for under $100 with a lens on the used market, while a used a6700 will run you about $1,200 to $1,400 for just the camera body, which is more than 10 times the price of the DSLR. And as you've seen in this video, the T3 is still capable of capturing beautiful images, especially with a little help in post. If you plan on picking up an older entry-level DSLR, I might recommend leaving room in your budget for something like DxO Pure Raw, although Lightroom's built-in denoise feature can probably get you pretty close to the results that you've seen in this video too. It could also be worth setting aside a bit of money for a budget prime lens, something like the Canon EF 50mm f1.8 STM, which you might just see on a future video here on the channel. The moral of the story is to not let gear be the barrier that stops you from starting your photography journey. You can always upgrade later. What matters most is getting out and shooting now. I won't pretend that the Canon matches the Sony a6700 overall, but in terms of raw image quality, I think it holds up better than you'd think. And with the right tools, I still think older gear still has plenty of life left in it. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into cameras, editing, and finding ways to push your gear further. Also, do me a favor and let me know in the comments what your first camera was, and if you still have any of the raw files from it. Thanks for sticking around until the end of the video. I appreciate it more than you know. Until next time, this is Bedrock Reviews, signing off.